Welcome back to Key Dialogues. I'm Dr. KK. So this week we're really going to dig into social construction, the social construction of race. But what does that mean? It really means that anyone, no matter who they are, or where they come from, or what language they speak, can be constructed, can be created as the other. And in this instance, the other is really persons of color, persons of color. Before we get into social construction, I think it's really important that we begin to anchor ourselves, just ground ourselves in time, right? And so one of the ways that I became really interested in this conversation is that I always began asking myself, no matter what was happening, what was I doing in this time? So when I began to learn about history, my marker was 1865, because 1865 was the year of supposed freedom for persons who were enslaved in this country that were of African descent. That the enslavement experience lasted from about 1619 on through 1865. If you think about 1865 through 2017, you'll know that persons in this country, in the United States, have been out of slavery less than the time they were in slavery. That's one really important thing I want you to remember. Second, I want you to know the greatest gift of all was given to persons of African descent in this country in 1865, along with freedom on December 24th, Christmas Eve, was the birth of Ku Klux Klan. I want you to really think about the idea that persons of African descent were both granted their freedom, and at the same time they were granted their freedom, there was also a tool which was constructed to lynch, hang, subdue with other violence outside of the enslavement system. So we want to think about that. As we think about this idea that not only Black people have been niggers, there have been other niggers, right? Irishmen, Asians, the people of the British Isles, lower class persons in Europe were also considered to be niggers. This word, nigger, is really a tool that is used to language the other. And so as we think about the attachment that many persons of African descent in particular have to the word nigger, we also need to investigate what is the relationship between that word and other people. What is the relationship between color and experiences of being other, or the inferior, right? The so-called minority. We want to take, at this particular time, the Chinese into our view. All of the colors on the race symbolism chart, and we know those from our previous discussions, are white, yellow, brown, black, and red, are movable. They're movable. All of those colors except for white, which maintains its positioning at the top of the hierarchy, and black, which maintains its positioning at the bottom of the hierarchy. At one time, yellow was at the bottom of the hierarchy. And in fact, Patterson, in his classic book, White on Black, tells us that racial qualities which had been assigned to blacks became Chinese characteristics, calling for Chinese exclusion. Now remember that the Chinese Exclusion Act happened in 1882. And that's only a few years before 1865. And many people don't really think about the fact that while African enslaved persons were here picking cotton for free, We were, in fact, allowing Chinese immigrants to come in and build railroads for maybe a little under $2. So we want to think about that. Chinese exclusion was supported because the Chinese had most of the vices of the African. Every reason that exists against the toleration of blacks in Illinois may be argued against that of the Chinese as well. They are heathen, they are morally inferior, they are savage and childlike. The Chinese were also viewed as lustful and sensual, and Chinese women were condemned as a depraved class, much like their average everyday black girl. And their depravity, hypersexuality, depravity, right, was associated with their almost African-like physical characteristics. And if you don't believe me, you can Google the icons and the images which were created during World War I, World War II, and you can see many of the persons of Asian descent are depicted in the same way that they are described here. In order to change someone into the other, they must go through what is called the niggering process. Who knew that there was actually a niggering process? But Dialto tells us that in order to transform someone into the nigger, there must be three things that happen. One, there is a focus on the coveting of white women or women of European descent. Two, there is a focus on violence or the threat of violence coming from that person of color. And three, there is a focus on physical characteristics such as hair texture and color, which is associated with a stereotype. In 1965, there was a report published by Moynihan, and this report was on the Negro family, right? And basically, this report carried with it an assertive, straightforward kind of thesis that said, you know, black people in America are not advancing because there is a vein of criminality, hypersexuality, lust, laziness that was inbred in the culture, that was implicitly couched in black culture. And after this report came out, the New York Times approached a UC Berkeley professor by the name of William Patterson, who was a sociologist who had never done any work at all studying Asian culture or Asian American culture, and asked him to write an op-ed piece which talked about the success of Asian people in this country in opposition to persons of African descent. Subsequent to that article, this new idea, because this is the term he coined in that article, the model minority, began to emerge. And while many people think the model minority is a compliment, it really only says that persons of Asian descent are the top of the bottom, and they full well know they will never be inducted into whiteness because there are physical features that they cannot escape. So the model minority and this idea of whiz kids were born, which places quite a bit of pressure on Asian American people or new immigrants from Asia that people don't really think about because it presupposes that they have some intellectual capacity that they may or may not have. I want us to see that the social construction of race is an intentional process. I want us to remember that being niggerized is a process. As always, this has been Dr. KK.